At some point, you stopped texting first, stopped checking in, stopped asking people how they were. And the strange part is, almost nobody noticed. No messages, no, "Are you okay?" No one asking where you went. And that's when you realize something painful. Some relationships only existed because you were the one holding them together. Not because people truly cared, but because you kept the connection alive. And after a while, you stopped trying. Not because you hate people, not because you wanted to disappear, but because constantly reaching out to people who would never do the same for you became emotionally exhausting. At first, you probably didn't even notice it happening. You still answered messages, still tried to be there for people, still told yourself they're just busy, but over time, patterns started becoming impossible to ignore. You realized certain people only talked to you when they needed something. Some disappeared for weeks, then returned acting like nothing happened. Others let you carry the entire friendship alone, and somehow, you became responsible for maintaining connections that were supposed to be mutual. You started realizing, if you didn't text first, the conversation died. If you didn't make plans, nothing happened. If you disappeared, some people wouldn't even notice. And that realization changes a person. Because eventually, you stop asking, "How do I keep this friendship alive?" And you start asking, "Why am I the only one trying?" That's the moment people usually begin pulling away emotionally. Not dramatically, not loudly, quietly, slowly, almost invisibly. You answer less. You stop explaining yourself. You stop sending long messages, not because you suddenly became antisocial, but because your energy no longer feels safe in one-sided relationships. And what hurts most is that people often notice your withdrawal only after they benefited from your effort for years. The moment you stop carrying the connection, everything collapses, and somehow they act surprised. But deep down, you already knew it would happen, because real connection doesn't disappear just because one person stopped doing all the work. A lot of emotionally aware people experience this. The more self-aware you become, the harder it becomes to tolerate shallow dynamics. You begin noticing things most people ignore: who listens and who only waits to talk, who checks on you and who only contacts you out of convenience, who actually values your presence and who simply enjoys access to your attention. And once your brain starts recognizing these patterns, you can't unsee them. That's why emotionally intelligent people often become quieter over time. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they become more selective about where their energy goes. You stop giving unlimited access to people who treat your effort like something guaranteed. And eventually, distance becomes a form of self-protection. The strange part is, most people completely misunderstand this change. They think, you became distant, you changed, you stopped caring. But what they don't see is how long you cared before that. How many times you reached out first? How many times you checked on everyone else, while nobody checked on you? How many conversations you carried alone? How many times you ignored your own exhaustion just to keep people close? People only notice your absence once they no longer benefit from your presence. And that realization is painful because it forces you to confront something difficult. Some relationships survive only because you kept them alive. And after enough disappointment, your brain starts adapting. Psychology calls this emotional withdrawal, not because you don't want connection, but because your nervous system becomes tired of emotional imbalance. You stop investing deeply into people who repeatedly leave you feeling empty afterward. You stop expecting consistency from inconsistent people. And eventually your brain begins conserving energy automatically. That's why even answering messages can start feeling exhausting. Not because texting itself is difficult, but because emotionally, you already associate interaction with disappointment, with imbalance, with effort that rarely gets returned. So your mind starts protecting itself by pulling away before exhaustion happens again. And the more emotionally drained you become, the more silence starts feeling peaceful. Not lonely, peaceful because silence doesn't demand anything from you. It doesn't require performance. It doesn't force fake enthusiasm. It doesn't make you carry conversations that go nowhere. For the first time in a long time, you can simply exist. No pressure, no emotional labor, no pretending. And that's dangerous in a way, because once peace becomes associated with solitude, your tolerance for draining relationships drops dramatically. You begin realizing being alone feels better than constantly feeling emotionally unseen. This is why some people slowly disappear from everyone, not because they're heartless, but because they reached a point where protecting their peace became more important than maintaining superficial connection. And honestly, there's a huge difference between isolation and selective distance. Isolation comes from fear. Selective distance comes from awareness. You're no longer trying to be liked by everyone. You're no longer forcing yourself into spaces that leave you emotionally depleted afterward. You begin choosing depth over frequency, realness over attention, calm over chaos. And while other people may see that as withdrawal, your mind experiences it as relief. But here's something important that most people never talk about. When someone stops reaching out, it's often not sudden. It's usually the final stage of feeling emotionally invisible for a very long time. People don't wake up one morning and randomly decide to disconnect. It happens slowly after too many unanswered efforts, too many one-sided conversations, too many moments of feeling emotionally alone, even while surrounded by people. Eventually, the emotional cost becomes higher than the emotional reward, and that's when the silence begins. What makes this even harder is that many emotionally deep people rarely explain why they pulled away, not because they can't, but because they're tired of explaining things. Others should have noticed naturally. They wanted consistency without begging for it, care without requesting it, effort without constantly reminding people. And after a while, they stop talking about what hurts them. They simply become quieter, more distant, more careful. Not because they stopped feeling, but because they felt too much for too long. And if you're honest, there's probably a part of you that still misses connection. Not shallow interaction, not meaningless conversation. Real connection. The kind where effort feels mutual, where silence feels comfortable, where you don't feel emotionally alone around someone. That's what you actually wanted all along. Not constant attention, not endless socializing, just something genuine, something emotionally safe, something real. But when your experiences repeatedly teach you that your energy is rarely reciprocated, your brain naturally becomes more protective, more selective, more cautious about who gets access to you. And over time, you start realizing something important. Not everyone deserves the same version of you. Not everyone deserves your emotional energy, your attention, your care, your effort. Some people were only close to you because you kept reaching out, because you kept trying, because you kept carrying the emotional weight of the relationship. And once you stopped, the truth revealed itself naturally. That's painful, but also clarifying, because sometimes silence exposes relationships better than confrontation ever could. Here's the truth most people never realize. The people who stop reaching out are often the people who cared the most in the beginning. The people who gave the most energy, the most patience, the most understanding, until eventually they became emotionally exhausted. And when emotionally exhausted people go quiet, it's rarely attention-seeking. It's survival. Their mind is trying to recover, trying to protect what little emotional energy remains. So if you've stopped reaching out to people lately, maybe it doesn't mean you became cold. Maybe it doesn't mean you stopped caring. Maybe it means you finally became aware of how much emotional effort you were giving away to people who barely noticed it. Maybe your silence isn't hatred. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's self-protection. Maybe it's the first time your mind has stopped abandoning itself just to keep other people comfortable. And maybe the goal was never to become distant forever. Maybe the goal was simply this: to stop forcing connection where there is no reciprocity, to stop chasing people who only value you when it's convenient, to stop shrinking your emotional needs, just to maintain relationships that constantly drain you. Because real connection doesn't require one person to carry everything alone. Real connection feels mutual, natural, safe, balanced. And once you experience that, you realize something powerful. You were never asking for too much. You were simply giving your energy to the wrong people. So if you've gone quiet lately, if you've stopped reaching out, if you've started protecting your peace more than before, maybe your mind is not becoming colder. Maybe for the first time in a very long time, it's finally learning its worth.